A very good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be speaking at this forum, and of course, whenever Bishan invites, it's very difficult to say no. His ever smiling face really forces you to say yes to each and every invitation which he sends. And being a dear friend, he always keeps on calling me. So it's always a privilege to be speaking. And today I am coincidentally the last speaker. So I'm sure the earlier three speakers have covered the topics in extreme detail. And the topic which is allotted to me is a sort of a relief and a benevolent provision, which is amnesty scheme. And in that sense, my task is slightly simpler, and I'm happy that it's a bit simpler. Of course, perhaps Bishan felt that amnesty itself may not have enough content to take through the entire 1.5 hours. So he just tried to put a little bit extra to it by saying, sir, it will be amnesty along with certain recent amendments. And by trying to be a little bit greedy, Bishan, you put me in a fix. Because when we say recent developments, and when I started putting it down, there were just too many things. And then it became difficult to really say what to cover, because if I wanted to cover everything, maybe I would have needed the entire day. So then I thought, let me just pick up some select recent developments, not all. And of course, amnesty is the crux of today's discussion. So we'll prioritize amnesty. Look at a few amendments proposed by the budget 25. It's going to be a very fast walk on that. And two important developments, which is in the last 1 year span, which is impacting more or less each practitioner and most of the taxpayers. We'll try to touch upon. Then one is the invoice management system, maybe a few minutes on that. And thereafter move into the so-called controversial issue of input service distributor, which we are aware gets implemented from 1st of April 2025. So that's broadly what we plan to cover as of today. The primary emphasis, as I told you, was the amnesty scheme. Though the law doesn't use this word amnesty, I'm sure all of us are popularly talking about it as an amnesty scheme. It's basically a sort of a waiver scheme, a conditional waiver given by a specific provision under the GST Act itself, section 128A. We are aware because it's been there since quite some time. So I'm sure most of us are aware of the provisions of section 128A, which says that if there is any tax payable in accordance with some specific document, and that document is an important facet to it, we'll talk about the type of situations covered by the section 128, and not all cases of non-payment or underpayment of taxes are covered. It's only where there is some tax payable consequent to a list of specified documents, and we'll talk about what the documents are in the next slide. It is for a limited period, the initial periods of GST implementation, so only 3 years. So that's another thing which you will always have to check. What is the financial year for which the tax is due? It has to be either for 17-18, 18-19 or 19-20. Only those 3 years periods are eligible for the amnesty. For the other periods, you will have to pay taxes in normal fashion. And what we are told is, yes, if there is any tax payable based on a document for these 3 periods, then you can pay the full tax demanded, no waivers on the tax front. You pay full tax demanded before the notified date, which we are aware is the 31st of March 25. And once that tax is paid, we are given a waiver from interest and penalty. So we are told there will be no interest penalty. All proceedings which are consequent to the document, which is the show cause or the order in appeal, will stand to be concluded. The major caveat, and we are all aware of it, is the fact that no refund will be granted if you have already paid up some amount of interest or penalty. So your action of an amnesty will result in a waiver of unpaid demand to the extent of interest or penalty. But if some part of interest or some part of penalty has already been paid up, nothing is going to be refunded back to you. If you are in an appellate forum, we are told that you will have to first withdraw the appeal. There's an elaborate procedure for that. And then once the entire proceedings are concluded, then you cannot further file appeals on that front. Of course, there's a exclusion to say that if you were granted a refund and a notice is issued to recover that erroneously granted refund on an allegation that the refund is erroneously granted to you, in that case, you are not eligible for the amnesty in that situation. So it has to be a tax demand, either a tax or an ITC demand, then you will be eligible. But if it's a erroneous refund, which has been sought to be recovered, you are not eligible for the amnesty. This I am going a little bit fast because I think these are basics. All of us are aware of the provisions in this regard. But yes, if there are any questions, this is the last session, so I'm sure you will also be slightly fatigued. So please raise your hands if there are questions on that slide. Don't preempt questions of future things which are not on the slide, because it will come in a subsequent slide. But if on a particular topic which I am discussing, if there are questions, we can make it interactive. You can ask the question at that point of time. Not to discourage questions towards the end, but yes, we can ask right now. Yeah, please. Yeah, an important question, whether late fees are governed, the answer is no. And I think that's also clarified through the FAQs that late fees are not governed by this, because the waiver is only of interest and penalty, not of the other consequences like the fines and the late fees. So that will be payable. There's no amnesty on that front. Yes. Sorry, I didn't. Can you repeat what? I didn't get your question. हाँ.
सर जो आपने बोला ना कि अभी मैंने वहाँ फाइल किया अपील, तो मैंने वहाँ पर एक अपील का वो मैंने अभी फाइल कर दी गया है, पर वो मेरा बीबी वो पेंडिंग है, तो फिर क्या करने का?
So you have filed an appeal or you are processing to file an appeal?
नहीं, फाइल किया मैंने.
फाइल कर दिया है, तो if you want you can go in an amnesty.
चलेगा ना फिर तो अभी तो कर
Of
सकते हैं.
course, situations we are coming to in the next slide, so that will explain you in more detail, because not all situations will be covered.
Okay, fine.
So just next slide, just hold back your question for this slide, wherein we are talking about the specific situations which are governed by the eligibility for amnesty. And as we are aware, subsection 1 talks about 3 specific subclauses, and only those 3 specific subclauses are eligible for the benefit of amnesty. Now here we will have various permutations and combinations, so we'll discuss them one by one, each of them. The first situation is a situation where a notice is issued under section 73(1) and no order is issued under section 73(9). Now we are all aware of 73 versus 74, that there are two provisions which govern the issuance of a show cause notice. 73 deals with normal case situations of a show cause notice. 74 deals with situations where a show cause is issued alleging that there is a fraud or a misstatement or a suppression. So the first thing is, and this is an objective check which you will have to do, you will have to check whether the document on the basis of which you are planning to file the amnesty application, whether it is under 73 or 74. Two situations, it is issued under 73 or issued under 74. You don't have to bring in your subjective analysis into this. Please understand this very well. The officer might have issued you a show cause notice under 74, and as we are aware, whenever a notice is issued under 74, in our reply the first argument is that there was really no suppression, and therefore we always argue and challenge the issuance of a show cause under 74. So your interpretation is that no, 74 is not applicable, ये fraud नहीं है, suppression नहीं है, but that is your interpretation. What you have to actually look at is the show cause notice itself. Is it under 73 or 74? Don't bring in your wisdom onto this. Check in the notice whether it is 73 or 74. That's all. If it is under 74, you are not governed by clause A. It has to be under 73 to be governed by clause A. What happens if notice is under 74 but later held to be 73? There is a separate proviso to deal with it. We'll talk about it when we go there. But in clause A, आपका टेस्ट यही है कि show cause should be under section 73. Am I clear up to here? What is the period for which the show cause should be there? We have talked about it in the earlier slide. Only 3 periods are covered, right? 1718, 1819 and 1920. ये case में there is a show cause but no order. This is the first starting point of your eligibility for amnesty. And those who are into day-to-day practice know that वो show cause आने के पहले बहुत सारी बातचीत होती रहती है, बहुत सारा वॉक हुआ है, उसके बाद शोकोज हुआ है. It all starts with a simple email saying that according to me you claim more credit. Maybe there's sometimes an ASMT 10. Sometimes there is an audit which is ongoing. So in the audit process, informally, the audit team tells you pay this. Sometimes they send you an email during the audit process. Sometimes they will issue what is known as an ADT 02. ये सब हमको मालूम है. Please understand, all of these are pre-show cause notice documentation, and these documentations do not entitle you for the amnesty scheme. Your amnesty scheme will start only if you have received a show cause notice. Now, what is that show cause notice? Again, many a times we are aware that sometimes they issue a DRC 1A and then they issue a DRC 1. These documents we are aware. DRC 1A is a intimation prior to the issuance of a show cause notice. So earlier it was compulsory, now there's an interpretation whether it's compulsory or optional on the officer to issue a DRC 1A. Some departments issue, some officers don't issue DRC 1A. Again, the answer is the same. You cannot apply for an amnesty against a DRC 1A. Just like you cannot apply for amnesty against an ASMT 10 or an ADT 02 or even a voluntary payment for that matter. You cannot even apply for amnesty against a DRC 1A. Your starting point or entry point into amnesty is DRC 1, show cause notice. And that show cause notice has to be under section 73. Are we clear on fund? Because काफी doubts ये point पे regular basis पे queries आते रहते हैं. So are we clear about this part of it? The entry point under subclause A is section 73, show cause notice. Let's progress a bit further. Let's go to subclause B. Subclause B looks at a situation where not only a show cause is issued, as we are aware, after a show cause you will file a reply. And after the reply, there will be an hearing and an order. So here that show cause notice has been issued, hearing has happened and an order has been passed. So once an order is passed, notice is no longer relevant because that notice gets substituted by the actual order. Right? So the second situation covers the case where adjudication is completed and order is passed under 73(9), but no appellate order is passed. 107 we are aware is the provision relating to the first appellate order. So this is another situation continuing from the first trend itself. Show cause was from 73. You replied and an order is passed. And if such an order is passed, such an order also entitles you for the amnesty scheme. Are we clear of this? Right. Now let me take a situation, and this is again a situation which keeps on coming up, and maybe we can answer. It's a simplistic situation. Let us say there is a show cause notice of 50 lakh rupees. And an order is passed. There are few issues, and an order is passed wherein out of the proposed demand of 50 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees is confirmed. Balance 40 lakhs is dropped. Now when you apply for amnesty, your demand starting point will be what amount? 50 lakhs or 10 lakhs? Show cause was for 50 lakhs. Adjudication order is of 10 lakhs. I think everyone's answer is very clear. 10 lakhs. Let's flip it a bit and say there was a show cause of 50 lakhs and the matter is still pending. Order is not passed. But you feel that 40 lakhs is just a simple game. You are eligible because you are in clause A then, not in clause B. Your base will be 50 lakhs, or can you yourself reduce 50 में से 40? I will try my luck at the adjudication and 10 lakhs I will want to go for amnesty. No. That is one of the questions which comes in, that if there are multiple issues in a document, you will have to apply for all the issues simultaneously. You cannot pick and choose issues. So if there are two issues, sometimes what happens is there is an issue of 2A, 3B, which you are sure you will get a certificate. But there's also a blocked credit issue. And because of Safari retreats you now and the retrospective amendment, you feel that you will lose on that count. So you cannot choose and say that I will apply for the block credit thing as an amnesty, and for 2A, 3B, I will continue with my litigation or my adjudication. I'll try my luck at the adjudication level or at the appellate level. So that pick and choose is not available is one of the points which I wanted to explain. So that takes me through A, B. Up to A and B we are clear. Now comes C. C is a situation next step, one step further than that. B, A situation था शो को स्टेज है. B situation है एडजुडिकेशन हो गया लेकिन अपेलेट ऑर्डर नहीं हुआ. C is a situation where an order is passed under section 10711, which is basically the first appellate order. First appellate authority का order, depending on whether it's a state or center, it will be the JC appeals or the commissioner appeals order. And no further order is passed by the tribunal under 1131. 113 is basically GST tribunal appeals. We are aware tribunal is not set up. So technically in C, if the first appellate order has been passed, it will always become a part of C in that sense because tribunal is still to be formed. So therefore there couldn't have been any order from the tribunal under section 1131. Are we clear? So even those situations are governed here. Clear of A, B, C, three situations? A is show cause, no order passed. B is order passed, first appellate order not passed. C is first appellate order passed, tribunal order not passed. Right? Now I'll give you one situation. There was a show cause under 74. It got confirmed in Ohio. The person filed an appeal before the first appellate authority. And the first appellate authority also continued with the same. He did not grant any relief. And there is an order from the first appellate authority confirming the demand along with the interest and the penalties. Is this person eligible for amnesty? Are you clear of the facts? Starting point of the notice is under section 74. Thereafter there is an adjudication order and thereafter there is a first appellate authority order. And the matter is pending right now. This person is waiting for the tribunal to be set up so that he could file an appeal. Can he apply for amnesty? No. How many say no? How many say yes? So only a couple or 3 people or 4 people saying yes, yes. More than 60% said no. I think balance is undecided or sitting on the fence. Depending on the answers, they'll take a call. Why no? Many people said no. Why no? Show cause starts with 74, so no. Why yes? 2 or 3 people said yes. Why yes? Yes. Subclause C doesn't talk about 74 or 73. A and B talks about 73 specifically. Subclause C does not talk about 73, 74. So, in fact, 73 and 74 are 2 proceedings for show cause and order. The end result of that will ultimately go into a common section 107 because the first appellate authority, the provision is common. There is no separate bifurcation in 107, which is the first appellate authority provisions, to differentiate between 73 and 74 cases. Now, because C, subclause C, does not refer to 73 specifically, says that any order which is passed under 10711 is eligible. Right? If you literally read what is written here, any order passed under 10711 is eligible. No order passed, we are aware, because tribunal is not there, no order can be passed. That's fine. And even the example which I gave, show cause under 74, order in original under 74, and order in appeal is under which section? The order in appeal is never under 74. The order in appeal is under section 10711 only. So if that be the case, I should be eligible for the amnesty in this situation. I am aware that the mindset at the ground level is going to be very different. You will have to apply for amnesty. it is likely that he might reject your amnesty application, and there's a different grievance redressal mechanism for that. You can file an appeal against that and all. So all that you can keep on doing, and definitely at that some point of time, based on legal interpretation, some authority will have to grant you relief to say that subclause C will have to be read separately as compared to subclause A and B. Am I clear of this? Right. Now, there are a couple of provisos, and these are interesting provisos. The first proviso says that initially the notice was issued under section 74. But as we are aware, 74 deals with situations of fraud. And in our submissions, in the reply, the taxpayer says that, look, I have not committed fraud for so many reasons. And this is a genuine issue of interpretation or a mathematical error or something like that. And the authority ultimately holds that yes, this is not a fraud, and therefore converts that notice from 74 to 73. Then this proviso says that yes, the day that conversion happens, this eligibility for amnesty opens up. Now please note, this is a very interesting facet. In the first ABC, you would have seen the timelines is 31st March. But these are cases where show cause is issued under 74 and the matter is pending. Because it was under 74, you felt you are not eligible for ABE, etc. Now, maybe 6 months or 1 year down the line, somebody holds that this was not 74, this should have been 73. So what the law is saying is that even though 128A amnesty is generally a timed scheme, for this situation, I will give you time even if the order is passed later. So let us say in October 25 the order is passed. Then we are told that this was section 128A, the amnesty will be available to you in October 25 even though the original 31st March timeline is over. What we are told is that we will get 6 months from the date of the order which reclassifies the notice from 74 to 73. So in that sense, this becomes a sort of an open-ended scheme to some extent because this can happen at a futuristic date. The second situation is, in the earlier slide we talked about a case where if you have filed an appeal, you have to withdraw the appeal. But as we are aware, there are situations where the government or the department will file appeals. Some partial relief is given to you in the adjudication level and the department files an appeal. There is no mechanism for a department appeal to get withdrawn. They are not forcing a department appeal to be withdrawn. That litigation continues. So in that case, if ultimately the department appeal is held against you, again an open-ended area is given, you are told that at that point of time, you can apply for the amnesty within 3 months from the date of the order wherein the department appeal is allowed and your defense is rejected at that point of time. So these are the situations which we are talking about. And please note, every time you look at an amnesty application, you will have to see whether it is A, B or C, and or either of the provisos. These are the 5 situations where you can get relief. If you are not fitting in any of them, please do not venture into the amnesty, you are not eligible. If you are not fitting into any of the ABC or the 2 provisos. Now assuming that you are fitting into that, how do you go about it? We talked about the fact that the notified date is 31st March. So you have to make the payment by 31st March. After making the payment, you have to make an application. Different forms are there now. They have operationalized it on the portal, but I understand there are some technical glitches there. And that application has to be filed by 30th of June. So different forms are there. SPL1 if it's not adjudicated, and SPL2 if it is adjudicated. And payments, of course, they have said you pay by DRC3, or if it's an order passed, then pay through the electronic liability ledger. And last month, they have also created this new document called DRC3A. If you are paid through DRC3, you can use a DRC3A to route that payment from DRC3 to the electronic liability ledger. So those who are on a day-to-day operational basis would understand that these are all, different nomenclatures of essentially validating a payment which you have made towards this specific demand. So those are the situations which will get covered over here. And of course, for the first and the second proviso, you have to make sure that the payment and the applications are also done within the same timelines of payment. For the normal ABC cases, you have to make payment by 31st March and the application due date is 30th June. So you have 3 months of breather for filing the application after making the payment. So yeah, 2 or 3 specific situations. The first one we talked about, we said that if there are multiple issues involved, you cannot pick and choose. The entire document is either under 128A or it is not under 128A. Now, problem will come up in situations where there are partial eligible cases, partially ineligible cases. So one common situation is that the same show cause notice demands a recovery of an erroneous refund as well as demands some other tax. So as we saw in the first slide, erroneous refund recovery is not eligible. Other situations you are eligible. So in this situation, there is a guidance given through Rule 164, which says that look, you now have one document, you can't split that document into two. So, and you are not eligible for everything. You are eligible only for one issue, not eligible for amnesty for the other issue. So what they say is, you pay the entire tax first. Both for the eligible as well as the ineligible issues, pay the entire tax, apply for amnesty. When you apply for amnesty, the officer will go through these details. He will say that yes, this is eligible, so he will waive that interest and penalty. But for the ineligible component, he will confirm the interest and penalty, and that you have to pay. So you will have two tranches of payment. First is the entire tax for both the eligible as well as the ineligible issue. And thereafter, after the order is passed for the amnesty application, you will pay the penalty in the interest component for the ineligible issue like the refund issue. Am I clear of this? Similar argument is given when there is a consolidated order or a show cause notice. 3 years are eligible, but the order is, let's say, for 1920 and 2021. So we are aware 2021 is not an eligible period. So in this case, again, you will go by the same logic, eligible, ineligible अलग करोगे, पूरा tax पहले भरोगे, और ineligible component का interest and penalty you will pay after the amnesty is approved by the officer and he determines this amount separately. Are we clear of this? Yeah. And the final clarification which is given again through a rule and a procedure is a situation where the second amnesty, which we'll be talking about in a minute, about 16.5 and 16.6, we are aware of these provisions which gave a retrospective relief for the timeline matters. One of the questions in the earlier session was about the timelines under section 16.4. And those timelines we are aware were relaxed by 16.5. So for periods up to 21, we were told November 21 is the outer date for all the periods. So if you are governed by 16.5 or 16.6 and one of the issues in this is relating to 16.5 or 16.6, you only pay the balance tax, and in the application you give all these details. Officer will verify those details and accordingly he will waive off this amount. So this is how the different types of combinations of situations have been dealt with in this. Are we clear of the situations? Any questions on this? Yeah, I think there's one question from there. Can you speak on a mic, because, or can you speak it louder? So I think the law is very specifically mentioned in that manner that no refund will be given for an amount already paid. Whether it is justified or not is another question. But yeah, if the law says that you will not get a refund, it will be very a Herculean task to assume that I'll litigate for it and get a refund. It's going to be a very complex game to get a refund. So I'm not too excited about that type of a thought process.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, during adjudication process, at the time of issue of show cause notice, there was a tax, interest and penalty. Tax had been paid before issue of show cause notice, but interest and penalty was not paid. And now under 73, show cause issued for balance interest and penalty payable.
Okay.
So can they go under this scheme?
So this again has been clarified in one of the FAQs. In your case, I put it very simply. The show cause is issued only for interest and penalty. In this situation also, the CBEC clarifies that you are eligible for the amnesty. There's only a small caveat they have done, that if the tax was self-assessed in the return and delayed reporting of the self-assessed tax, then you will not be eligible. We'll come to that point slightly later, and then I'll explain my point of view that perhaps that clarification is not correct. Right? So as of now, to answer your question, I don't think your case is that of a self-assessed tax or a delayed reporting. Therefore, I'm sure you are eligible, and the CBC also clarifies to that effect. So I think that let's go quickly to the procedure. Very elaborate procedure has been mentioned, and I think there are logical steps. And those steps are basically you'll start first by determining eligibility based on whatever we discussed a few minutes back. The next step is to pay tax. If you filed an appeal, withdraw the appeal, because without withdrawal or appeal, you cannot file an application for amnesty. And thereafter, you will file an application for amnesty after payment of tax and withdrawal of appeal in either SPL 1 if it's not a demand order, it's a show cause stage. If it's an OIO or an OIA stage, you will file SPL 2. Now, consequent to your filing of an application, officer will have three things to do. Either he'll confirm and he'll pass an order, confirm your application, meaning that yes, you are eligible for relief, and pass an order, or he will issue a notice for rejecting the application. He might say that you are not eligible for amnesty, and he may, in those types of situations on verification, if he feels that you are not eligible for amnesty, he will issue a show cause notice for rejection of amnesty application, and this he will have to do within 3 months. If he does not either pass a confirming order or a show cause for rejection within 3 months, then there's a deemed approval. So these three situations, either express confirmation or a show cause for rejection or deemed approval, 3 months is the timeline from the date of filing the application. Now, of course, if he is confirming your application, you are happy, that's the end of the story. You have already paid up the tax earlier, and he'll issue you an order. That's the close of the matter. Assuming he issues a notice for rejection, again, principles of natural justice, you will reply to that, you will be given a hearing for that, and thereafter he will pass an order either allowing your amnesty or officially rejecting your amnesty. Against that official rejection of amnesty, you can file an appeal, not on the merits of the case. मेरिट्स का तो बात अलग हो गया. अभी ये सिर्फ आप एलिजिबल हो फॉर एमनेस्टी और नॉट एलिजिबल फॉर एमनेस्टी. फॉर दैट यू विल फाइल एन अपील, and that will be again heard based on principles of natural justice. And finally, if that outcome is also unfavorable, in that case your original matter or the litigation will get restored to the because you had withdrawn an appeal na, underlying appeal आपने withdraw किया था, so that appeal withdrawal will be nullified and you will then be eligible to argue on merits. So this is, I think, the broad process steps, and one can go through the rule in this regard. I think it's fairly straight jacket type of a thing, but I thought in one slide I'll just cover what is being talked about over there. And now coming to the FAQs, there have been a detailed FAQs, and some of this we already covered in some of the questions. First question which comes up is a situation where a tax, interest and penalty is proposed and the matter is pending in the show cause. Answers are simplistic. Pay tax, you get full waiver of interest and penalty. Second situation again is somewhat similar, where you are in an appeal, you have made a partial pre-deposit of tax. So naturally you have paid 10% when you have filed an appeal at the first appellate level. So you will pay the balance 90% because 10% has already been paid. So that gets adjusted. Balance 90% will be payable and you will get full waiver of the balance interest and penalty. The third situation is again a very commonplace situation, slightly simpler than the query which came up a few minutes back. Which is a case where typically central tax authorities do it in this manner. They will issue you a show cause notice saying tax, interest and penalty is payable. Maybe you have already paid up the tax earlier while in the audit process or something. So they will propose an appropriation of that tax. So here clearly tax is fully paid up. Even the FAQ says no additional tax is payable. Interest and penalty will be fully waived because you have already paid up the taxes in the past at some point of time. And it was payable. So they are saying it will be adjusted and no further penalty or interest will be payable. The next one is the situation which was coming up. Only interest and penalty is proposed in the show cause notice. Again the CBC says no additional tax to be paid, full waiver of interest and penalty will be available. Up to here it's fine, but there is one small sentence which I have highlighted in italics, which says, however, interest on delayed filing of returns will not be waived since it is self-assessed. Honestly, I do not see that type of interpretation coming from section 128A to specifically exclude self-assessed taxes. Just because self-assessed taxes can be immediately recovered, that does not mean non-applicability of the amnesty or the waiver scheme. So to that extent, only to the extent of this line, I think the circular or the FAQ is incorrect, and one can really say that, how can you say that this is only a self-assessed? And firstly, where is there in the provision in the law that if it is self-assessed, underlying tax is self-assessed, Therefore, the interest and penalty will not be given a waiver. There's nothing of that nature in the entire scheme in any manner. Partial waiver we talked about not eligible. In the first slide only we had talked about late fees and redemption fines not being covered under the amnesty scheme and not being eligible. So this is, I think, the FAQs which get summarized as far as the amnesty is concerned. So yeah. That's true. So this is actually a ground level issue which went a bit faster in this slide. So typically what happens is this entire how to make the payment, there had been a little bit of a challenge in the earlier periods. So let us say you have paid up some amount even before the OIO is confirmed. Okay. So let's say the tax demand was 100. You would have already paid up 20 at some forum on your own calculations and all, whatever be the basis. Now naturally you paid that tax through DRC3. Now when the order is confirming the demand, the show cause was of 100. That show cause of 100 automatically becomes an electronic liability ledger. And if the order does not specifically appropriate this 20, your electronic liability ledger will continue to show 100. Okay. If that electronic liability ledger is showing 100, SPL2 will pick up that 100. Now what you have to do in this case is, because you have a DRC3 which is a sort of a suspense, your 20 rupees which you paid through DRC3 is a sort of a suspense. So you have to file a document called DRC3A. And once you do 3A, this 20 will get adjusted against ELL and then SPL will be correctly done. So I think there are quite a few glitches. We have also come across a few glitches. Though I think the only point is that the software has been developed a bit. In that case, what you are saying is clearly an error on the part of the software. You can raise a grievance, and I think at some point of time that grievance will have to get sorted out. If it does not get sorted out, you can file a manual application saying that because the grievance is not getting sorted out, I am filing a physical application to my jurisdiction. Yeah. Only thing is just check this DRC thing. From what you are saying, you already checked that the credit in the ELL has happened. If it has happened, that should not be ideally a problem. But if the software, we are aware that there are many glitches in the software as of now. Yeah. Yeah. This one. Huh.
And that late return was filed without making payment of interest. So right now department had issued notices just to do recovery of interest. They had not issued so cost notice.
So if there is no so cause notice, you are not entering into the scheme at all.
And is there any way for getting?
So there are
waiver of
2-3
that
ways
interest?
in which people issue notices where taxes have already been paid. Either they'll write letters or they'll issue a notice directly under section 75, not under 73. They'll directly say that because this is a self-assessed tax, I am eligible to recover it without determination. Those situations are out of this entire amnesty application. But many officers still issue a show cause under 73 for demanding interest. If a show cause is issued under 73 for demanding interest, then subclause A becomes applicable and you enter into the scheme. अगर आपके केस में 73 notice नहीं है, तो you are not eligible. It's as simple as that. Yeah. Yeah. Only penalty. What is the nature of the penalty? No, so you'll have to, because see, generally we believe interest and penalty tag along with tax, right? So, are you talking, what type of a penalty are you talking about? Are you talking about fake invoicing penalty? Then it's 74, it's anyways out. So you'll have to look at what type of the penalty is, and then only one can really, because there are various types of penalties, and accordingly the answers will change. Assuming it is a normal penalty where you are paid tax and interest voluntarily, and he is issuing a notice for 73 penalty, then you will be eligible. Like the earlier clarification which we talked about, no? Where tax is paid but interest and penalty is proposed. So there they have clarified that no additional tax is to be paid and full waiver of interest and penalty. So if it's just an extension of that situation, that you have paid tax and interest, but yet the officer issues you a penalty under 73. Please note this. Because most of the times when tax and interest is paid before show cause, officers don't issue notice under 73. They will issue notice under 74, and then you are ineligible. So you'll have to actually go to understand what is the type of the penalty you are talking about, and accordingly look at this table which we talked about in the first place and take a call. ABC में कहाँ बैठ रहे हो? And then take a call. Yeah. So I think that was on the main amnesty scheme. Two small mini amnesties all of us are aware. One is section 16(5), which gives you a benefit of retroactive relief for periods up to financial year 2021. If there was a timeline prescribed under section 16(4), we are aware that earlier it was September and then it was changed to November. And that timeline is now said that for this earlier years, the timeline will be 30th of November 2021. So naturally there will be various situations, and depending on the situation, if you have already repaid up the tax along with interest, whatever, then we are clearly told that there is no refund. That question also somewhere had come up in the discussion. So that's very clearly told to us that no refund of tax already paid or ITC already reversed will be given back to you in any manner. So here there are actually, when you look at section 16(5), there are I think 4 or 5 situations based on the maturity of the case. And I think we can look at each of them and look at what is the action point on each of those situations. The first situation is that you had filed return late. So your original credit was late, but because of this retrospective amendment, it is now within the timeline. But luckily, you have been lucky enough कि अब तक कोई show cause नहीं आया है आपको. अगर show cause नहीं आया है, तो answer is simple. They have clarified that at the time of issuance of show cause, the officer will consider this retrospective amendment, and therefore there will not be any need for him to issue a show cause. That is what they have said. So basically, अगर audit stage पे अभी चल रहा है matter, अभी show cause नहीं आया, audit query निकालेगा. Most of them will not raise a query. But if there is a query, you show him this section 16(5), and once you show him the section 16(5), he will not issue a show cause notice. Same way, show cause issued but order not issued, at the time of order in original, the adjudicating authority will take care of it. Hearing में आप उनको दे दो, तो he will take care of it. Order issued, you have appealed, appellate order not issued, same answers. What they are saying is, if the matter is in a pipeline, then the officer who is going to decide this will consider this. So you don't need to do anything specific in these types of situations. But if there was an order which is passed and you have missed out the timelines for appeal, either you have not filed an appeal or you have missed the timelines for filing an appeal, in those situations you are stuck. And for answering those situations, they have clarified that what you will do is you will apply for a rectification. There is a situation where you can apply for a rectification. You will apply for rectification within 6 months, and once you apply for rectification with this actual factual data, the order in original or the order in appeal will be rectified to take cognizance of this retrospective amendment. So that is the only situation where you need to do something on the aspect of this section 16(5), the retrospective change in the timeline. Yes. Date of the amendment. Date of the amendment. The order could have been 1 year old also. The second, of course, we are aware about the timing issue of RCM, where you are procuring supplies from unregistered dealer. And there was this controversy that, okay, after 2 years, I realized that there were some payments made to transporters or advocates on which I missed out paying RCM. And therefore, I paid RCM at that time and I wanted to claim the credit. And the question was, because it was of an older period, whether I was eligible for credit or not. So we are aware that what has been now talked about and emphasized, which was already there in the law, but which has been emphasized through a couple of circulars and an amendment, is the distinction between RCM in cases where the supplier is registered and RCM in cases where supplier is unregistered. And we are told that if the supplier is registered, even though the transaction is under RCM, the supplier is expected to issue an invoice earmarking the transaction as an RCM transaction, upload it in your GSTR 2B, and that document of the supplier is a valid document for you to claim the credit. Practically, we have seen in many cases this rule is not followed. There are many transporters who are actually registered and they will never care to issue this type of an RCM invoice. And we would then treat it as URD RCM and pay tax and claim the credit. But yeah, the subsection 2, 31 subsection 2 obliges that transporter to raise an invoice and pay the tax. Not pay the tax, but mark the RCM and push it to you to pay the tax in the GSTR 2B. As compared to that, supplies from unregistered dealer, you are expected to keep a track of those transactions and pay the tax, which all of us are doing. But there's also an obligation under 31(3)(f) to generate a self-invoice, a document which you are going to create yourself instead of the supplier, which is we are knowing as a self-invoice, and that self-invoice becomes the basis for claiming the credit. Now this is what has been clarified. We are told that in case of a situation like, let's say 17-18, there was a transaction which was liable for RCM and I missed it out because of initial period of implementation and all those things. In 2021, I realized that I missed out a transaction of 17-18. So I paid the tax today. I generated a self-invoice today. And the question was whether I can claim credit or have I missed the timelines. And that is where this circular brings out the relief to say that it is the date of self-invoice which will determine the timeline. Not the date when the expense was incurred, not the date when the vendor issues some document, because transporter भी कुछ तो document देगा आपको payment लेने के लिए, उसका bill देगा. The transporter's bill, which is not a valid tax invoice, is not to be taken into account. You will take your own self-invoice, and based on that self-invoice, if it is within the timelines, you will be eligible for the credit. And of course, there is this another circular on valuation, but we'll not go into that in detail. That's as far as the amnesty, including the 2 mini amnesties, is concerned. Let's quickly go to Finance Bill 2025, and maybe we'll spend only a couple of minutes because not too many changes. A couple of important ones, I'm sure they have been covered earlier in earlier sessions. The first, of course, is the retrospective amendment to nullify the Supreme Court decision in safari retreats. Bharat Bhai has nicely covered it in the earlier session. Safari retreats basically gave relief on 2 grounds. First interpretation in safari retreats was that there's a difference between plant and machinery and plant or machinery. And subclause D uses plant or machinery. Subclause C uses plant and machinery. The definition of plant and machinery given through the explanation will not operate in subclause D because the words used there are plant or machinery. And therefore, based on functionality test, in certain situations, a building can become a plant. This is one of the paths in the safari retreats decision. Honestly, this path is actually a detour, because if you go to the Orissa High Court decision, there was never a discussion of plant and machinery versus plant or machinery. The entire discussion in Orissa High Court's case, the safari retreats basic case which led to the Supreme Court matter, was a case of a mall being constructed for further letting out. And the Orissa High Court had read down the interpretation of construction not for own account, and they said that if a person is constructing a mall for further letting it out, then he is not constructing it for his own account, and therefore he is eligible for credit. This was the Orissa High Court decision, and this observation has been continued in the Supreme Court also. So safari retreats in Supreme Court led 2 important paths. One path was the carve out on own account, and another was the distinction between plant and machinery and plant or machinery. the finance bill based on GST council recommendations has done a retrospective amendment to 17(5)(d). वो और word को cut करके and बना दिया. So basically the argument, the path to say that in D buildings can become plants is now ruled out because of the retrospective amendment. But make no mistake, for the other observation of the Supreme Court on own account, there is no amendment. And therefore, that leeway continues. If you are able to establish that the construction is not for your own account, but for somebody else's account, then you will be eligible for the credit. Earlier session, we did discuss a few examples, and of course, it's going to be very factual to examine and explain whether the construction is for own account or for somebody else's account. But yes, that is the limited amendment as far as the Finance Bill 2025 on this point is concerned. Another important amendment is relating to vouchers, and we are aware that there had been a lot of confusion on vouchers. A circular was issued in December to clarify that typically we want to interpret vouchers either as actionable claims or transactions in money. And we do not want to tax the value of the vouchers at the time of redemption when the underlying product or the service will be taxed. Now, with that circular, the provisions of time of supply for vouchers are becoming redundant. And therefore, those provisions are omitted in this finance bill. Yes. So the answer to this, you are talking about a case of a promoter builder. So when you talk about promoter builder, you are adding one more dimension of complication to it, because once you are a promoter, you also have to examine Rule 42, wherein at the date of receipt of completion certificate, there is a requirement of a proportionate reversal of credit attributable to unsold inventory. So it's a slightly tricky problem. It's not just safari retreats which will come into picture. Are you getting me? Because in commercial buildings, if you are originally intending it for sale, just because you have not sold it, you are renting. That's a different matrix as compared to a situation on day one you are clear, I am going to rent. You don't register under RERA, because as you are aware, if you are only going to rent it out, you don't need a RERA registration. And all your conduct during the construction period is such that you hold yourself out as an investor, as a contractor, and then you are going to rent it out. That is a situation which one may examine. But if you are a builder, you are going to sell residential property, you have advertised for sale, but just because it is not sold, you are stuck with it, therefore you are renting it out. I think that's going to be very ambitious to say that this is not on your own account. And you will also have to look at Rule 43 in this situation, 42 and 43 in this situation. So just, Bishan, we have how many minutes now? 10 minutes? Huh? Yeah. So I think two more points which I would just like to touch upon. One is the invoice management system, which has already been implemented. Of course, unlike ISD, which is mandatory, this has not been made mandatory, it is optional. But by conduct, they've made it mandatory. Because while they say it's optional, there are certain things where an auto action is being taken. And when we go into that, we'll understand that the type of problems that auto action is creating in the actual day-to-day implementation and discharge of taxes. But before we go into that, let's understand what is this invoice management system all about. Many of you must have been aware of, how many of us are aware of the IMS? Yeah, so that's quite a good number of people who are aware, but I'm also seeing a lot of hands not being raised. So इसलिए या नहीं actually जानते? Because this is very critical in terms of your day-to-day tax compliances. I would not say there's a lot of advice or some legal interpretation, but from a day-to-day implementation, this is a very critical step. So we are aware as of today, because ideally you will claim credit as per books. That's what even Bharti Airtel Supreme Court says. But a couple of years back, because of their internal settlement problems and challenges and other things, a circular was issued wherein we are told that irrespective of a credit appearing in your books or not, you are expected to claim it. Circular 170, if I'm not mistaken. Irrespective of whether you have received the goods or services, whether you have received the invoice or not, whether you have booked it or not, if something is appearing in your 2B, the circular says you first claim it. Naturally, you can't take it. So, what the circular says is, after claiming it, whatever is yours you keep, and whatever is not yours you reverse. I hope we are aware of this, right? That everyone is aware of. So, the entire credits in your GSTR 2B auto flows as what we say 4A5 in your GSTR 3B, the input credit from forward charge. And then based on matching, which you do based with your books, you will either treat it as a permanent reversal, saying that no, this is not my transaction, or it's a block credit or something like that, or you will put it in a temporary reversal, because many a times you will not know the vendor. The tax team may not know who the vendor is, or the transaction may be in transit. The goods may be in transit, or the service bill has to be still approved by the concerned person in the organization, and therefore booking is not done. So you have 4B1 and 4B2 temporary and permanent reversals, wherein you will reverse the credit after forcefully claiming the credit as per 4A5. And then we are told कि आपने जो temporary reverse किया, वो subsequent month में आपके books में आया, तब you reclaim it, and that is shown as additional information in 4D1. We are aware of this thing, and based on this portal automatically, कहीं law में कहीं नहीं है, but portal automatically generates a document called cumulative statement of reversals and reclaims, and they try to match कि reclaim is less than reversal, and if there are some challenges there, then they'll issue you auto-generated notices. So this is being implemented since quite some time. The problem in this implementation is twofold, and the first and the major problem is you are forced to claim a credit which is never yours, even though you are reversing it on the same day. The circular says you reverse it on the same day, but legally, can I claim and reverse? And more importantly, why should I do that? Because most of the corporates, they face a challenge. They say somebody else does a mess in his accounts. Maybe he's a stranger to me, and he puts something jabardasti in my 2B, and you force me to claim and minus it, and then after 3 years when an assessment comes, I have to explain what is this plus, what is this minus. Why should I mess around my books? And that was a genuine concern of the industry and the trade, that firstly the circular has no standing, because section 16 doesn't allow you to claim the credit, yet the circular says you claim the credit and reverse. So to address these concerns, this filter, and I say IMS is nothing but a filter, an intermediary filter, has been introduced. What the IMS does is, before something goes into 2B, from the vendor's 1, the document comes into your 2B. But here we are now having a filter in between. This filter is IMS. From 1, things will go to IMS. And in this filter, you are given control. As a recipient, you have a control to either accept the transaction, reject the transaction, or keep it pending. Depending on what you do, the transaction will flow into your 2B or it will not flow. So if you say reject or pending, the transaction will not flow into your 2B, and therefore your 2B will not have garbage. So that's how I look at IMS. It's more like a filter. And that, to that extent, I think the objective is very noble. But the problem is, we have 2 types of documents or 3 types of documents: invoices, debit notes, and credit notes. So while the law permits you, or not the law, the processes permits you to accept, reject, or keep pending for invoices and debit notes, for credit notes, the advisory is you can't keep a credit note pending. And government's logic is simple. Invoice and debit note तो tax create कर रहा है, right? So वो tax तो भर दिया है supplier ने. अगर recipient accept किया तो भी ठीक है, उसको credit मिलेगा. नहीं किया है तो उसको credit नहीं मिलेगा. Government को कोई नुकसान नहीं है. But when you look at a credit note is a minus. It's a downward adjustment into your tax liability. So the supplier has enjoyed a downward revision in his tax liability. And if the recipient keeps it pending, government feels I am going out of pocket. So the government says that in case of a credit note, you can't keep it pending. You have to tell me clearly whether accept or reject. If you accept it, I will give you less credit. And if you reject it, I will ask the supplier to pay the tax. So that is where the entire thing comes in. So these are the actions. Invoice and debit note, as we said, we have three possible actions. For credit notes, pending is not available. Accept means your ITC will reduce as a recipient, and reject means information will go to the vendor and his output tax liability will increase. Am I clear of this? And based on this filter, after you apply this filter, you will then generate 2B, and we are told you can have multiple iterations of generation of 2B till the time you ultimately file your GSTR 3B. So that's how the new interface of this IMS comes into place. Now, no, so you can do that till the time you have filed your GSTR 3B for that period. If you have already filed the 3B for that period, so it's sequential. So what happens is, if I can go back to this table, you can see three things: IMS, 2B and 3B. And they are sequential. So from IMS to 2B, you can keep on flowing around. You can do accept, reject and generate 2B. Again go do accept, reject, again generate 2B. But the moment you do a 3B, at that point of time, IMS and 2B gets locked. You can't do anything. 14th. No. We have done in our offices on 15th, 16th also. Only thing is, if the 3B is filed, then that's the end. Yes. You have to regenerate the 2B. So on 14th you have generated one 2B. On 15th you decide you want to do some accept, reject. You go back to do that. After doing that, again regenerate 2B. So it will get regenerated. But moment you go to file a return in 3B, that's the lock. So the problem here is relating to credit notes. And because you are not allowed to keep it pending, there is a bit of a challenge, especially in many large industries. There is a concept of cancellation credit note. Ek cheez hai, you have raised an invoice of 100, you are giving him a discount after 3 months, volume discount or something. I think there's are simplistic cases. We don't want to go into that. But a bulk of credit notes in most of the companies is on account of some errors. So for example, an entity will issue an invoice to one Mr. A with a GSTN of Maharashtra. But later on he realizes कि नहीं, उसने गलत से एक ड्रॉप डाउन में महाराष्ट्र चूज कर लिया था. ये invoice actually is pertaining to Andhra Pradesh. Now IRN has been generated. Most of the companies have ERPs which will not permit you to change anything once things are submitted or saved. So आपको क्या करेंगे? वो डेटा एंट्री ऑपरेटर के पास कोई ऑप्शन नहीं है, बट वो जो एरोनियस इनवॉइस है, जो कस्टमर के पास पहुंचा भी नहीं है, वो कैंसिल करने के लिए he will have to make a credit note of the same types of data. This I say is a cancellation credit note. So in these types of situations, you have an invoice 1, which is an erroneous invoice. You have a cancellation credit note 1. Let's say first amount is plus 100, the second amount will be invariably minus 100 with the same data. And both of them nullify. And then you do the correct one, the third invoice, which is invoice 2. बराबर है? Have many of you faced this actual situation? So in this situation, when you look at invoice 1, credit note 1, plus 100, minus 100, plus 100, ये अपना transactions है. अब तक हम ये तीनों चढ़ाते थे, plus 100 tax भरते थे. Now the problem comes about invoice 1 and CN1. Look at it from a recipient's perspective. Recipient's perspective, he has different options for actioning out. For invoice, he has 3 options: accept, reject and pending. For credit note, he has 2 options: accept or reject. Best case scenario is either accepts both or either rejects both. Life is simple. But practical scenario ऐसा नहीं होता है. Right? And let's understand practical scenarios क्या होते हैं. We are now on the recipient's side. I am not on the supplier's side. At the recipient's end, in his IMS, he sees a credit note. And he has to decide whether he has to accept the credit note or reject it. If he does not do anything, it is accepted. And if he accepts a credit note, the impact is his input tax credit reduces. Are we clear of this? So acceptance is a problem for him. Unless he actually wants to reduce his input tax credit because of legal reasons, it's another thing. But many situations, he may not have claimed the credit at all. So if he has not claimed the credit, will he accept the credit note? Let's look at these situations. उसने invoice pending में रखा है. Because when he does an invoice matching, he does not see this invoice in his books. So all invoices which are not in his books, the tax person will keep it in pending. He'll say that November 25 तक time है, November 26 तक time है, तो अभी मैं देखूंगा क्या करना है. Right? So invoice is in pending, and now he is staring at one credit note. What will he do for that credit note? He has not claimed the credit because invoice is in pending. Will he accept or reject? Reject. Moment he rejects, supplier's tax liability increases. उसको invoice 1 का भी टैक्स भरना पड़ेगा और invoice 2 का भी टैक्स भरना पड़ेगा. आप समझ रहे हो? Right. Second situation is previous month में invoice is deemed to be accepted. बराबर, उसने कुछ किया नहीं था, उसने IMS ज्यादा पहले देखा नहीं था, अक्टूबर नवंबर दिसंबर पहले महीनों में किसी ने देखा नहीं था, तो डीम्ड एक्सेप्टेंस हो गया. फिर उसने टू बी मैचिंग किया सर्कुलर के हिसाब से. So when he does a to be matching, he takes it to temporary reversal because he knows it's not in my books. Right? वो erroneous invoice है, उसके books में नहीं है, तो it comes in temporary reversal. So effectively he has not claimed the credit. Will he accept the credit note or reject it? Reject again, same problem. And those types of problems, you can have many situations over here. Some of them might have solutions. As a supplier, you might request the recipient कि आप temporary reversal से reclaim कर लो और फिर मेरा credit note accept करो. वो बोलेगा मैं करूँ लेकिन क्यों करूँ? Right? So then as a supplier it becomes very difficult because so many situations where the recipient, if he has not claimed the credit ab initio for whatever reasons, various reasons, and he would not have claimed the credit, why would he accept the credit note? And if he does not accept the credit note, you are stuck with a double tax liability. And this is where I think you have to be very careful in your client's implementation. How do we deal with these types of situations? And honestly, there's nothing in the law to guide you about this except a small amendment in the Finance Bill 25 to say that reversal of a self-adjustment of credit note will be available only subject to the customer reversing the credit if he has claimed. But that's still a broad legal proposition. At a practical level, the portal forces you to do this. So now how do we deal with this type of a situation from a supplier's perspective? And while there are no very simple answers to this, and the simplest answer is to not make mistakes, but we also know that life is such that everybody will make mistakes at some point of time. So if there are mistakes, how do we deal with it? And I think while it may be a little bit messy, an easier and a better solution is to filter the credit notes at the time of GSTR1 itself. So while there is an invoice 1, a CN1 and an invoice 2 in your sales register, when you go ahead and submit your GSTR1, examine these invoice 1 and CN1 and weed out those, remove those while filing GSTR1. Net tax impact is 0. Right? Now I'm sure somebody will say IRN generate हो गया था, तो मेरा document count change हो जाएगा. Yes, those queries will come. But I would believe it's easier to address those queries rather than keep on chasing the recipient. And if that recipient does not cooperate with you, you end up with an additional double tax liability. So I think that's a practical call which everyone will have to take on this point. And I think the last point which I want to touch upon is on the input service distributor. Again, this can be a very long topic in itself. We are aware that there has been an amendment to say input service distributor will become mandatory. In the past, we have all understood cross-charge and input service distributor as alternatives to each other. And some people were doing cross-charge, some were doing ISD, and through FAQs and circulars, that it has been clarified that either of those things is workable. Having said that, there were lots of conflicting advance rulings and case laws and all those things were happening on this front. And based on that, ultimately we are now told ISD is mandatory. The question which comes is, while ISD is made mandatory, there is no stepping back of the concept of cross-charge. There is no corresponding amendment in Schedule 1 Entry 2 to say, except situations governed by ISD. And therefore, the key question comes is, how are you going to distinguish between items which require ISD and items which require cross-charge? So, while we now have a guidance to say ISD is mandatory, I don't think I can assertively say that cross-charge is not required. I hope we all understand this, right? So how do we decide? And we can't have both, right? Because the objectives of both is merely to move the tax accumulation from one state to another state. In that sense, both serve a similar objective. So how do we interpret ISD? And in the context of cross-charge is something which we need to look at. And to address that issue, I think we need to go back to a draft circular which was issued way back in June 2019. Never saw the light of the day. Even today, it's not a enforceable circular. It's still a draft circular which was not accepted. But it gives a lot of thought on what according to the law commission they think is ISD and what they think is cross-charge. Many of you, I can't go into too much detail for the want of time, but I'll strongly recommend Google it out, download this circular if you have not read it, and please go through this before you implement ISD in your client's location. And this one chart which I've taken from that, this is a very example from that draft circular, is about an IT company wherein they, through a picture, they've tried to explain that there is a head office in one state and there are two branches in two other states. And then various examples have been given. The first example they are giving is a situation where there is a security deployed at each of the branches, but rather than the security agency billing those branches, a central invoice is sent to the head office. And then this circular says that this is a case of a central procurement of service and this is ISD. Now compare that with other examples wherein they say that if at the head office there is an admin team doing various types of administrative role or an HR team doing an HR function, these are all examples of internally generated services. These are not ISD matters. These are matters which will go under cross-charge. So broadly, this concept of centralized procurement versus an internally generated services found its roots from this draft circular. And I think it's a logical way to look at it. Now, when ISD is being made mandatory, there are two schools of thought. One school of thought is to say any common expenditure, and this is common expenditure is no word anywhere in the law, but generally it's understood common expenditure hai to ISD kar lo. Then somebody will say, okay, what are the examples of common expenditure? So they'll say legal and professional fees. They'll say accounting charges, statutory auditor, various, because all of these are common expenses. So all of this is ISD. This is one school of thought. But if we go a little bit deeper, we need to understand what is the context of ISD. Maybe Senvet credit rules के time स्टैट्यूटरी ऑडिट कॉर्पोरेट ऑफिस में होता था, वो फैक्ट्री में आईएसडी से थ्रू जाता था. Maybe pre-amendment that was being done, but post the amendment when ISD is being made mandatory, is that what is expected to be done through the ISD concept? And that's where I think we need to compare the definition sets of ISD for the various provisions. And in this slide, I've tried to bring it again for time. I will not go into detail, but I'll just highlight one important part. And this part I think is missed out in many discussions, is the amended definition of ISD. Every forum discusses कि ISD is now mandatory and therefore common services should be distributed. But very few forums discuss this red font which is shown here. This phrase is introduced in the definition of ISD for the first time. The earlier two definitions of ISD did not have this phrase requiring an ISD to be an office which receives invoices for or on behalf of distinct persons. ये जो phrase है for or on behalf of distinct persons पहली बार आ रहा है. And when we try to understand this phrase, it basically means a situation where a service is received by the branch itself, and it is only that the head office is procuring, issuing a PO, receiving an invoice, making a payment. But the service is received by the branch. That is ISD. Now when you look at an audit is not like that. Audit, the head office receives the service. It does not receive it on behalf of the 5 branches. It receives it for itself. Yes, it's an important function, and based on that function, when the audit report is generated, the benefit of the audit report is received by the branches, because they will have to submit it at all their departments and wherever they want to do. But the point which I am trying to make is there's a distinction between a receipt of service by a branch and a receipt of a benefit by a branch. If it's a receipt of a benefit by a branch, it will be a cross charge. If it's a receipt of a service by a branch, it will be ISD. This is, I think, the basic principle which I would look at. Let's take a simplistic example. Let's say there's a company which incurs advertisement expenses for brand building, and it is getting an invoice in Maharashtra, 1.8 crores का ITC है. पहले वो महाराष्ट्र में लेता था. It already has a couple of show cause notices. One is कि आपने कुछ एक्टिविटी ये जो ब्रांड बिल्ड किया आपकी सब्सिडियरीज ने यूज किया है. सो इफ सब्सिडियरीज यूज द ब्रांड, naturally you have to cross charge or schedule 1 entry 2 becomes applicable. And there has also been a question about proportionate ITC reversal. Now in this background, he has to decide whether this advertisement cost of 1.8 crores, should it be ISD or should it be cross charge. So if you look at the entire matrix, the service is used for not only 5 of my branches, but also for 2 subsidiaries. We are aware ISD will work only for multiple GST and within the same PAN. For a subsidiary, you can't distribute through ISD. So, if this is interpreted to be a common expenditure, to the extent of subsidiary, will you be able to do ISD? So what will you do? Cross charge. But we are told that branches are like subsidiaries. Multiple GST, and section 25 says each branch is a distinct legal person, just like a subsidiary. So can I say that out of this 1.8 crores, for 2 subsidiaries I will do a cross charge, and for the 5 branches I will do ISD? And if yes, please understand ISD registration number is distinct from a cross charge registration number, normal GSTN. So to the vendor, which number are you going to give? You can't give him 2 numbers. He can upload the credit only into 1 GSTN. So will you expect him to upload it in the normal GSTN so that you can cross charge to subsidiaries, or will you expect him to upload it in the ISD registration so that you will distribute it to branches? I think this explains the entire conundrum of cross charge versus ISD, and therefore I would believe that one will have to look at a sort of a restrictive interpretation of ISD based on the interpretation of the phrase for or on behalf of. And maybe one might say that yes, if there's a consolidated security payment made from head office, or let's say all over India the freight is paid, there are 10 factories, but all the freight RCM is paid only by the head office. Yes, these are clear-cut examples of ISD. But if there is some consumption at the head office, and just because some benefit is passing to the branches, I would believe that ideally should not become a part of ISD, but should continue in the cross charge. The procedural side, I think all of us are aware. Only one caveat and one important thing which I want to discuss before I wind up is section 21. When I think this is a section which we all of us need to be aware of before we implement ISD. The entire scheme of ISD is, as we are all aware, ISD is not an entity or a registration availing the credit. It is like a pipeline. It only distributes the credit to the recipients or to the branches. All of us are comfortable with that, right? That's very clear in the law. And therefore, what section 21 says is, any errors and omissions or mistakes or wrong claims of credit, all those show causes, who will be issued? Will ISD be issued a show cause, or will the branch be issued a show cause? But ISD has not availed the credit, so how can he be issued a show cause? That's what section 21 says. It says the excess distribution shall be recovered from the recipients, not from the ISD. Now please understand this thing. There is one invoice. There are 20 branches. Today, that invoice, if it is going through a cross charge, the head office claims the credit. And if any query comes, it comes from the head office's department, tax department. At the branch level, there is no query about the underlying document. But now, if you are doing it through an ISD, the fraction, 1/28th, 1/15th, depending on the turnover, this entire invoice gets split into so many different branches. And each branch can question that thing. Your 180-day reversal will happen at a branch level. Your credit notes reversals will again happen at a branch level. And therefore, if you have 10 branches, every ISD action you do will increase activity by 10x. And that is something which you need to be careful about before taking a position. Because those 10 branches can be at different locations, and the tax officers there, we have already seen lots of situations where there's a dissimilarity in the same activity at different tax departments. So we have to be slightly careful on that front. I think that's where I would like to wind up my session. I completed the time allotted to me. Thank you very much for a patient hearing.
I would like to thank C.A. Sunil sir on behalf of WRC for sharing knowledge and experiences about GST amnesty and recent amendment schemes. This learning will be helpful to us in saving our clients' excess funds. Thank you so much, sir, for a lively session. Also, I would like to thank C.A. Bhishan sir for organizing such a wonderful program, and the audience also. Thank you so much.